Good morning. Good morning to you all to this second day of our international conference, which will be focused mostly, especially in the morning session, will be focused on the report, the sharing of the research project that was carried out on universities and communities of religious life that are characterized by multiculturalism, both for formators and formees. We will begin with a short video clip that will bring to you the greetings of the GHR Foundation from Minneapolis, USA, that has supported our project. And they do not just give us money, they give us a lot more. But today's moderator of this first part of the morning session, Professor Aldo Scoda, will elaborate on this. And I would like to welcome him and thank him. Good morning. I would like to extend to you all my warmest greetings, and also to those who are following us through the Zoom platform. There are many out there. Yesterday, too, there were many, and this is also thanks to the new technologies that are providing us with new opportunities to follow this important conference together. Yesterday was particularly intense, and it was dedicated to the topic of multiculturality, perspectives, and multicultural also views on things. And from the different speakers, we were able to hear very detailed and profound explanations of some terms and very important dynamics regarding multiculturalism, and also the openness to multiculturality, with the intersection between different know-how and practices, starting from philosophy, going to theology and human sciences. And the morning session is dedicated to the following topic: multiculturality and formation of consecrated life. And we will dedicate to the presentation, we would dedicate time to the presentation of a research project that has inspired this conference. But before introducing our distinguished speakers to you all, I would like to just to provide you with a few logistical, let's say, messages. I would like to invite all those who are connected on Zoom to turn their microphones off during the proceedings. Please mute your microphones. Keep them on mute at all times. And I would like also to thank the technical staff, by the way, who are helping us out to organize this event. And I would like also to ask the speakers who will take the floor today, please, they should not speak too fast, to also make the simultaneous interpretation in the different languages easier. And interpreters are thanking you for this. And I would like also to thank the speakers, saying our interpreters, for their hard work. Today will play out as follows. Each speaker will have 15 minutes for their presentation and to discuss the most important, let's say, issues that are part of their expertise. And then after the first round of presentations, they will have an additional 5 minutes to make comments, and then we will open the floor to our participants, the ones who are here in person and also the ones following us remotely. And whoever is following us on Zoom, you can use the chat box to ask your questions, and then the moderator will gather these questions and will pass them on to our speakers. I would say that at this point we can begin. And I would like to introduce to you Professor Kathleen Mahoney. And we will actually see a short video clip. She will be introducing today's proceedings. Professor Mahoney has worked on the intersection between higher education institution, religion, and philanthropy. She graduated in religious studies and theology at the University of Toronto and Notre Dame. and she has a PhD in education from Rochester University, where she has focused on the history of education. She has been a Spencer Dissertation Fellow, and she received a postdoc grant from the National Academy of Education. She wrote Catholic Higher Education in Protestant America, the Jesuit and Harvard in the Age of Universities, that has been awarded many prizes, and she has co-authored Religion in American Higher Education. As a faculty member at the Lynch School of Education of Boston College, and she has established the Institute for Administrators in Catholic Higher Education. More recently, Professor Mahoney has worked in the field of philanthropy for almost a decade. She directed Porticus North America, and now she's Senior Program Officer for the Global Development of the GHR Foundation. Very well, let's listen to her words right now.
I'm Kathleen Mahoney, and I'm with the GHR Foundation. It's a pleasure for me to be able to join you today and to bring greetings from the Foundation to all of you who are talking about the importance of multiculturalism and formation of women and men religious. It's a really important topic, both for religious life and for the world at large. We know that women and men religious have long been people who have crossed borders. The borders of race and ethnicity, you've crossed national borders and those of cultures. And how important this is, especially today, as we see places around the world where tensions are rising, as our willingness to engage with others, to welcome the stranger, seems to be waning. And so we hold up religious life as a blessing and a sign of hope, as people who do indeed cross borders for the gospel and for mission. But we know it's not without its challenges, too. At GHR, I've had the privilege of working with Catholic sisters from across the world. It's been a wonderful opportunity to see up close leadership, service, and spiritual witness. And it was through that work I came to know Sister Joyce Myers. She's an American sister. She's a member of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And in all my years of work, I've never met a person who has crossed as many boundaries and as many borders as she had. I think it was perhaps because Sister Joyce had traveled so much. She had a particular affinity for sisters in the United States who were in the United States but had come from other countries. And she was in contact with some of them. And in some instances, she had some concerns. She was concerned about their well-being. They seemed to be, struggling as they were immersed in new cultures, but there was little support from afar, and there were few resources nearby. And so she became their advocate. And she, in doing so, really became the person who challenged a familiar narrative. There was many of us, including myself, who knew the history of how sisters from Europe had come to North America, accompanying immigrants, living with them, being one of their community, and trying to ensure their well-being. But if that was history, the more contemporary reality, well, similarly, many of us would say there are increasing numbers of sisters from Latin America and Central America who were in the United States. But Sister Joyce was urging us to look more closely. And so it was at her urging, a number of conversations were started. And there was one important meeting which brought together representatives from a number of groups. And there, person after person shared reflections. And as they did, it became more and more clear that we did indeed need to look more closely. Well, how fortunate we were that there happened to be rather close at hand a research team based at Trinity Washington University and led by Sister Mary Johnson, who were ready to take up this study. And they did, and it's the first of a kind study of international sisters in the United States. You're going to be hearing from Dr. Mary Gauthier, one of the research team, during the course of this conference. You're going to hear some of the findings that when we heard them, really opened our eyes to the sheer numbers of sisters who were in the United States but had come from other countries. and the ways in which they were experiencing challenges and the ways in which they were a blessing to our life as a church and society. Of course, the numbers they uncovered were impressive, but they pale in comparison to the number of sisters who are in Rome, who come from other places of the world, where, of course, Rome is the crossroads of the Catholic Church. And so, again, how fortunate that Sister Patricia Murray, the Secretary General of the International Union of Superiors General, she decided to have a convening so that the research could be foregrounded. And luckily, very fortunately again, one of the participants was Dr. Luca Pandolfi of the Urbaniana. He recognized the importance of this topic and decided to move ahead. And so we're delighted that a partnership ensued between UISG and the Urbaniana, and for the research which Dr. Luca Pandolfi and his team have conducted. So it's been a privilege for GHR to be a partner in this work, to provide support for the research that was done in the United States and here. And we want to thank all of you, first and foremost, for those of you who advocated for this work, for those of you who conducted it, who went out and gathered data, analyzed it, and brought it forward, and for those of you who planned for this convening. Thank you for giving more of us, all of us, a chance to look more closely at multiculturalism and the formation of women and men religious. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Bene, invito.
I invite on stage Professor Gautier and Professor Pandolfi to.
Professoressa Ottone.
Professor Ottone also.
Professoressa Mary Gautier.
Professor Mary Gautier is a senior associate professor at the CARA, Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown University. She has a doctorate at the Louisiana State University, and before getting to CARA in 1998, she taught sociology at the Louisiana State University and in Texas Christian University. And she was a pastoral assistant at the parish of St. George, Baton Rouge in Louisiana for 6 years. As a CRA, she was specialized in sociological trends, and she manages data about the church, and she leads mapping, computerized mapping projects, and the CRA project report, and she's co-author of many monographs, including
American Catholics in Transition, New Generations of Catholic Sisters, Bridging the Gap, the Opportunities and Challenges of International Priests Ministering in the United States. Siamo molto lieti di averla.
And we are very glad to have you with us today, and she will talk about situation of religious all over the world in the community of the U.S., a sociological study.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a privilege to be here. As Kathleen said, this study that we conducted in collaboration with Trinity University, Washington, D.C., and CARA, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown University in Washington. This study is the first ever national study of international women religious, that is, religious sisters and nuns, that was conducted in the United States, funded by GHR. We collaborated, Trinity and CARA collaborated to design this research. I have a couple of definitions I need to give to you right at the beginning that define the parameters of the study. First of all, for our purposes, an international sister is a woman religious who was born outside the United States and is now living in the U.S. in ministry, in study, or perhaps just in residence there. For this study, we also use the term religious institute to refer to any religious congregation, religious order, province, region, or monastery that has separate governance. Those are two important terms that I will refer to. The study, which was conducted in 2015 and 2016, involved 3 pieces of research. The first was a survey of religious institutes that was addressed to the religious superiors of all US-based religious institutes. We had no list of international sisters. The only way to get a list was to ask all of the religious institutes, all of the dioceses, for these names. So we sent a brief survey to more than 500 US-based institutes of women religious, asked them for the names of their international sisters, and they gave us the names of 1,678 international sisters living in US-based institutes. We also contacted the vicar for religious of all US dioceses and asked them for the names of international sisters working in their diocese. This request gave us another 1,866 non-duplicated international sisters. In this way, we located over 4,000 international sisters in the United States, who we then surveyed for the second part of this project. And then in the third part, we conducted 26 interviews and focus groups with some of these sisters to dig more deeply, to understand more completely their experience. So first, the findings from the Institute study. About 2 in 3 of the 500 institutes that we surveyed responded to our survey. And like I said, they gave us over 1,600 names. These institutes that have international sisters, about 1/3 of the institutes are small. They have 25 or fewer members. About 1/3 are medium-sized. They have 26 to 100 members. And another 1/3 are large institutes in our definition. They have over 100 members. What can these institutes tell us about the international sisters that live with them in the US? Well, according to the major superiors, almost half of these international sisters came to the US first and then entered religious life after they were in the United States. So they weren't sisters when they first came. But about another half entered religious life first and then came to the United States. They came as international sisters. And just 5% transferred to the US, to a US institute from another religious institute that was outside of the US. In some cases, these US institutes don't have international sisters that are members of their institute, but they host international sisters. They offer hospitality or support to individual international sisters while they're in the United States, most often for study or for ministry. It's expected that those sisters would not stay in the US, but they would return to their home country when their ministry or study is completed. So we were curious about how do they find out about these U.S. institutes? Where do they come from, and how do they make that connection, that bridge? About 4 in 10 say that they have at least one international sister who had contacted them from abroad with a request to live with them. Another third had a sister that had contacted them from within the U.S. with a request to host. And just 4% had received a contact from a diocese for hospitality. And even fewer, just 2%, had said that their international sister just showed up at the door one day and said, I need some help. So what sort of help do they provide? More than a third of the major superiors say that their institute provided, 40 to 50% say they provided basics: housing, spiritual support, education, transportation, the basics that you would expect. But more than a third of major superiors say that their institute provided immigration legal services. 3 in 10 provided some sort of language support. 3 in 10 provided monetary support, sometimes financial aid for school or a stipend for ministry or some type of employment. About 1 in 5 provided mentoring of some type, and the same proportion provided some other type of acculturation training. And 1 in 10 institutes say they have provided an interpreter or some sort of cultural liaison for their international sisters. Finally, the respondents from the institute said that what is most needed is to help the international sisters feel welcomed and supported by the community. They emphasized that it was very important for US-born sisters and the international sisters to understand each other's culture. So, now we have a list of 4,000 international sisters. So in mid-2015, we mailed a survey in English and Spanish and Vietnamese to these sisters that had been identified by religious institutes and vicars for religious. We also distributed additional surveys at major meetings and gatherings where we wanted to really try to get as many sisters as we could. By early 2016, we received a response from more than 1,100 international sisters in 257 different religious institutes from more than 83 countries around the world. We had no idea. In addition to these surveys, over the course of a year, we conducted 26 interviews and focus groups throughout the US with a selection of these international sisters from 28 different countries on 5 continents. Each of the interviews or focus groups lasted between 30 and 90 minutes and centered around these 4 basic questions: the experience of arriving in the US, the challenges they faced when they were here, the contributions they make to religious life and ministry in the US, and also any advice they had for future arrivals and those who would welcome them. So, who are these sisters? First of all, where are they from? They come from 83 countries across the 6 continents. Asia is the largest sending continent. The largest proportion of sisters that we surveyed came from Asia. Oceania was the smallest. 1 in 3 responding sisters was born in one of the Asian nations. And among those Asian international sisters, Vietnam accounted for 44% of the international sisters. The Philippines were 24% of the Asians, and India was 23%. From Africa, where 10% of our responses came from, 38% of the sisters from Africa are from Nigeria, 16% were from Uganda, over 10% from Kenya, over 10% from Tanzania. From Central and South America, the 4 largest sending countries were Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, and Peru. And from Oceania, 71% of the sisters came from Australia, but 14% came from Samoa. So how did they get here? What was their pathways? Almost 40% of the responding sisters say they entered their current institute outside of the United States and then were sent to the United States for ministry. 28% came to the United States before they entered religious life. 13% had entered their current institute outside the United States and then were sent to the US for study. 10% were sent for religious formation to the US. And then a smaller proportion came in these other ways. Who are these international sisters? On average, they're 58 years old. 58. The average for overall sisters in the United States is high 70s. These sisters are much younger than the sisters, than the average native-born sister in the US. Nearly all of them are in active ministry, and only 1 in 10 are over age 80. On average, they entered religious life at age 23, the same as sisters, native-born sisters, and they entered the US at age 30. On average, they've been serving in the US for 27 years, under the radar. Nobody was really aware. About a third of these responding international sisters identify as Asian Pacific Islander. Another third identifies as European, Canadian, or Australian. A fifth identifies as Latin American or Mexican. And 1 in 10 identifies as African or Afro-Caribbean. Their language skills are excellent. 70% of these responding international sisters are fluent or native in English language. A quarter or more comprehend, speak, and write English at a minimum proficiency. Only 4 to 6% have no or limited English proficiency. And if, as would be expected, the longer these international sisters stay in the US, the more fluently they master the language. Their level of education. They're very highly educated. More than 7 in 10 have an earned undergraduate or graduate degree. More than 1 in 10 completed some college, and another 2% have a trade or technical school certificate. Very few, just over 1 in 10, has completed only secondary school. What are their current ministries? 85% of the respondents to the survey are in active ministry. Of those, about a fifth serve in parish or diocesan or ethnic group ministry. Another fifth serve in hospital, healthcare ministry. 15% serve in education. 1% serve in campus ministry. 14% of these sisters are students. 13% serve their institutes in leadership or vocation work and formation work. 9% serve in social service ministry, and just 5% are contemplatives living in monasteries. So that's the numbers. That's important numbers and very engaging numbers to us. But we need to go deeper than that. We need to know what underlies those numbers. Who are these women, and what do they face? So we did focus groups and interviews, as I said, asking them about their experience, their challenges, the contributions that they make, and what advice do they have. In the remaining few minutes that I have, I want to just share a few sentences, just a few quotes from some of the most incredibly powerful words that these women shared with us. What was their welcome like? Was it culture shock, or did it feel like coming home? Although they may seem comparatively trivial, the daily practical problems in adjusting to the different food, weather, and language of their new home loom large in the experiences of these international sisters. By far, the most common difficulty mentioned was with becoming comfortable in the language. One sister told us, "My problem was English language. I could understand nothing, and I was worried about how long it would be like that. But after a few months, I just started catching the words, and I started to understand whole sentences." Of course, I went to community college, and every day I went there to learn English. Other practical difficulties involved adjusting to the food and weather in the US. One sister said, "The most difficult thing I found when I came to the US was food, because I lived in the residence and the food there was the hospital food. So the first 2 weeks, I ate green apples, so I lost a lot of pounds. I did not want the food except some corn in the hospital. That was the only thing I would eat." Another told us, "That was the first time in my life that I saw snow. It was in 1964, and I had never seen snow in my whole life, and I thought I would freeze to death." Most of them told us in the surveys, almost all of them told us that they were satisfied with their housing, with their food, health care, transportation. They were satisfied with the support they received from the sisters in their local house, from their institute, from their diocese. We learned, though, particularly in the focus groups, that coming to live and work in another country brings with it many challenges, even in the best of circumstances. One sister told us, "My self-confidence was not very high when I first entered the US. I don't know if it was connected to being in a new country. In my feelings, it was like, I can't do this right. I can't do that right." Even in their ministry and their spiritual life, the sisters related to us some challenges that they faced in trying to fit in. Said one sister, "In my country, we had a place that we called the chapel, and it's especially for prayer. You can go there to do your personal prayer and your community prayer. When I got here, we had to pray in the living room, and I said, 'Where's the chapel?' That was very hard for me to get used to." The biggest challenge for most of these international sisters, though, was learning how to fit in, to feel comfortable in a new culture. They have to learn to live and speak in another language, even if that means taking a step back and going back to school. One sister told us, "I'd already finished college in my country, but when I arrived here, I had to start everything over from square one. I had to go back to school to learn everything again. And the language is really hard." Another very difficult challenge for international sisters, and frankly one that we didn't anticipate, was how to maintain their involvement with their community back home and participate in the life of their institute. One sister said, "I feel very responsible being alone. I have so much burden on my shoulders in terms of my ministry here. My leadership team has such high expectations for me, and because I'm here alone, I have to stay on track." But this is not a story just of difficulties encountered and challenges overcome. The International Sisters are truly a blessing and a gift to the Church in the U.S. They bring an international awareness to sisters who have been for too long inward-looking and culturally closed off. They bring a diversity in prayer and worship styles to the U.S. But perhaps the greatest gift that they bring to the U.S. is the gift of intercultural understanding. There's so much more I could say.
We'll have our 5 minutes after, no? We'll
Yes.
do
Let
a
me-
first round.
Let me just make one finishing, could we go back?
Torniamo alle slide un attimo.
I just want to say that as researchers, we're particularly sensitive to the challenges of these international sisters, similar to the challenges that all newcomers face in the U.S. in a new society, and especially one as complex as our country. We learned, though, so many stories from these sisters. We learned so many problems overcome, but we also learned so many gifts that they provide to us. They're part of the complex migration patterns that circle the world at this time. So while a century ago, many European sisters left their home countries to serve in the Americas, in Asia, and Africa, while we know that today these sisters in Asia and Africa and Latin America are sent to the North America and to Europe. But we also realize that the picture is much more complex than just this simple reversal of mission, because sisters from the North and South cross paths, creating new patterns of international relationship and ministry that have the potential for even greater collaboration and effectiveness. So while the primary focus of our research was on institutes and sisters, we also learned about many organizations, networks, and structures that have been developed or are evolving in response. So we wrote a book of the research. It's called Migration for Mission. The book provides rich detail from the surveys, also, of course, but also from the interviews and the focus groups and the research that we found about the resources that are available for helping international sisters. And we recommend the book and hope that it provides some encouragement and guidance for those who are serving international sisters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gutierrez. It was really, this research and conclusions are really not only interesting, but necessary and challenging as well for the churches and the religious life. Grazie per questo
Thank you so much for your contribution. We have seen when social research is applied also to religious life and ministry, it is not just a matter of reaching statistical conclusions, but rather to everything which then has an impact on the life of individuals, on community life, and pastoral life, with very interesting conclusions. And indeed, an openness that leads to a new potential and new challenges for churches and religious communities, starting from this multicultural component, which now is the hallmark of religious life. But I would say that this applies to all Christian communities. So thank you once again. Let us move on to the next presentation. I would like to introduce to you Professor Luca Pandolfi. He is a full professor of cultural anthropology at the Pontifical Urbaniana University. He's the president of the Higher Institute of Catechesis and Missionary Spirituality, director of the Social Communication Center at the same university. He teaches sociology of religions intercultural communication, communication, pastoral care, languages, and social doctrine of the church. Ever since 2004, he's been visiting professor here in Rome for a number of these subjects, also at the Pontifical Salesian University and the Pontifical School of Education Sciences in Auxilium. He has been visiting professor at the Archi Patagonia University in Chile, the School of Social Sciences of the University of Buenos Aires, the Don Bosco University in El Salvador, Instituto Internacional de Estudio Superior of Mexico City. He published several books and scientific articles. He also works in the domain of international cooperation for education and formation and social-cultural animation with young people and communities of migrant citizens. He's a priest at the Diocese of Rome. He studied philosophy, theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, where he specialized in fundamental theology. He also obtained from the University La Sapienza here in Rome the degree in sociology and a PhD in ethnology and ethnoanthropology. And he will talk about the experience of interculturality in multicultural educational communities, presentation of a research action formation carried out in Italy. I'd like to give you the floor, Professor, at this point. Thank you. Thank you for this very lengthy presentation. And I need the remote control here for my PowerPoint presentation. We have listened to Professor Mary Gauthier, who shared this experience with us. And that was introduced by Kathleen Mahoney from the GHR Foundation, and this is actually so. I can confirm this. Our research was launched after we listened to U.S. research that was presented here in Rome. We were inspired by this project, and back then, Professor Longhitano and our rector, Professor Trevisiolo, we really took this opportunity to think about Rome, right? Rome is an extremely multicultural environment, especially if we think about places of education and formation. And so I was entrusted with this research project. But the first thing that we did, we set up a team of researchers. We decided not to take this burden on our shoulders on our own, but we tried to involve several individuals and institutions, and from then we started working, we've been friends for a long time, with Professor Ottone and the Pontifical School of Education Sciences at the Auxilium, so that we could look into both aspects, training in multiculturalism in an anthropologist and a pedagogist, an anthropologist who deals with intercultural communication, and then a professor of general pedagogy that follows intercultural pedagogy more specifically. I would like to show you my slides at this point, so here they are. From this encounter, a dream emerged, that of looking into formation contexts that are typical of the Roman and Italian context in the Catholic world. So a number of pontifical universities and Catholic formation or education institutes, together with those who basically flock to these universities, who mostly come from the religious world. So there are men and women religious, who quite often live in communities that have been established specifically to study, or communities of formation in Italy that have been basically set up as aggregation opportunities for men and women religious coming from different parts of the world to receive a formation. So the Roman and Italian milieu was characterized by these two aspects: multiculturality, the plural origin, multinational origin of students in these universities, and also religious men and women, and also the formation side of things. We have set up a team which over time could conduct a research, and some of these individuals, actually, you will listen to them today, as a matter of fact. Myself, Professor Ottone, you find us here twice. Well, we begin. We introduce to you in a more historical and narrative way our research. Then there will be deep dives from those who have worked with us that will be presented, from the La Sapienza University, Cambridge University, and then we will try to draw some conclusions, basically, and provide you some indications for interpretation purposes. this was our focus. So the experience of interculturality in multicultural formation communities. And so we asked ourselves, okay, we are in multicultural contexts, but are they also intercultural? A major problem in human sciences, but also in the popularizing scientific language, is that these terms are quite often used interchangeably or synonyms, or sometimes questionable introductions are introduced, but these are two different words actually, and they refer to very different scenarios at times. So research, action, and formation, we will see this. It was not just a survey that has tried to gather information and data on the field, but we have triggered mechanisms that were able to set the, let's say, local reality motion for a moment of reflection and formation, both universities and in communities of consecrated life. In Italy, because this is what we worked, and with, let's say, most of the data came from Rome, as a matter of fact. And you can see here the table of contents, basically. Well, this is the roadmap of our presentation today. The team, then history, reasons and goals, the main concepts and the sample, methodology and tools that we have used, and then also thinking about the future of this initiative. So this is our team. This is a very important element here. And this was very appreciated by the people we interacted with. There was no, let's say, a top-down kind of hierarchical structure made up of a few people in this team. Initially, we have set up a team involving ourselves and UISG. And together they had, with us, they had co-sponsored this research, which was presented to UISG. And there we established this connection between the Pontifical Urbaniana University and UISG. Then we involved Auxilium and Professor Ottone. So we have set up this steering group that includes myself, Enrica, Tiziana Longhitano. Back in the day, she was the president, but she's still part of the coordination team. Sister Elisabetta Flick. She was one of the leaders from UISG, and I wanted to include her as well. First of all, we have embarked upon this path with her for the first 2 years. Then she then left UISG a year ago. Then she went to work in Turin with the poor people from marginalized communities. And unfortunately, she came down with COVID and she passed away. And Sister Elisabetta Flick, she is a woman who in the international and Italian religious world is very dear to our heart because of her wonderful work against the trafficking of women. And she has worked with us with a lot of passion and competence, and we would like to pay tribute to her today. And then we asked people from the outside world how to carry out this kind of research. So we involved Fiorenza Di Rio from the La Sapienza University. She's a sociologist with a huge background in statistical studies. Luca Di Censi, he's a sociologist. He's a researcher, and he works with the La Sapienza University and other institutions that are involved in research on the field. And last but not least, Nina De Leo, she's a researcher. She has a massive resume and a personal and professional experience that's multi and intercultural, but she's a sociologist as well, and now she's a researcher at Cambridge University. And then we set up a team of 10 other professors from other universities, from Claretianum. One of the universities was also the Pontifical Theological Institute for Consecrated Life, Claretianum, because it's supported, let's say, and animated by the Claretian Fathers. Mariolina Cattaneo, she's a Comboniana, she's an expert in formation, and she teaches at our university. Pellizzari from the Theological School of Sicily, Mazzola, she's a teacher. This list that I'm reading through super quick. Marta Seide from Auxilium, but you can read the list yourselves. It's right there on the screen. And then we have involved the students. PhD students or students in the second year of their specialist Asian studies from La Sapienza, Urbaniana, Auxilium, Salesian University. Young researchers, young students who gave a very interesting contribution. And with them, we have also gone through a time of formation. This was a very important aspect of this working group, because initially we went through a kind of self-formation so that we could understand what what tools to use. And we also tested on our own selves this survey, the research work, which we would then implement on the field. It was a beautiful formation experience involving young researchers and students, but also for us, because we have tried to standardize, quote unquote, the language that we were using in a good way. And then basically using these tools, being on the same page. It was not easy, really, to put together people of different ages and different backgrounds, but it was very fruitful work. And this was already a first element in this research action. We have already developed competencies, experiences, in addition to strengthening our mutual esteem and friendship. As you can see, there are different universities involved. If we look at the faculty members here, Auxilium and Urbaniana started this work, but then later on, we immediately reached out to other universities. And we have identified a sample to work on. And immediately, Claritianum was involved and others came on board. International College of Formation of PIME from Monza, the School of Theology of Sicily, St. John in Palermo. In Rome, by the way, in a second phase, we involved other universities such as the Salesian University, Seraphicum, Marianum, and so on. So a first working group was established that was quite interesting, and there we took care of the first and then the second part of our research. So we started from the experience in the United States, but in what way is our research different? Well, you have seen that the beautiful research illustrated by Professor Gautier, well, it was a research that in a way had the same, let's say, field that was being surveyed, seeing the dynamics in domain of high multicultural, let's say, dynamics. But in that case, there were communities, small, medium, or large, and basically the question was, how is the life of people coming from different contexts going, right? Our focus was different instead. We wanted to understand how formation worked. Of course, formation includes elements of community life, but we wanted to focus mostly on what changes in formation. In the formation of individuals coming from different countries. Bearing in mind that when I'm talking about people coming from different countries, in the case of pontifical universities, Catholic formation institutes, and communities of consecrated life, both for men and women, we see multiculturality refers to formators as well, not just, let's say, the target users, the formees. Formators and formees together, in what way does their multiculturalism transform, impacts programs, methods, relationships, and so on? In the U.S. research, the area was the United States. In our case, we focused on Italy. Thinking about the work carried out in the United States, it was a single stage with a structured questionnaire kind of methodology, but there were also focus groups, interviews, to formators. Instead, we had a multi-stage sample that will be presented to you, and we started identifying places where we could work, people who could be involved. And we were not really looking for a statistical representation, let's say, or representativeness. We wanted a sizable, a big sample, characterized by common elements in a way. In the case of the United States, communities where communities of women, in our case, they involve both men and women in consecrated and communities of consecrated life, we decided also to open up to communities of men religious. You will see that the analysis has been both quantitative and qualitative, and you will see why. And looking at the dynamics of coexistence, we had looked into the multicultural competencies of formators and formees in our specific context of reference. multicultural community members and dynamics of coexistence. Well, we're now oversimplifying the subject of and the object of the U.S. research. Instead, we wanted to see whether this multicultural, intercultural dynamics was clear enough. We wanted to look at both community members and their formators, and also look at the dynamics of coexistence next to the dynamics of formation. The basic assumption of our research is the following. What do we do with multiculturality, right? Do we build an intercultural process or not? And we wanted to look into the following aspects, which also came from our experience in the field, from our past life. So, first of all, multiculturality is there, but it can be ignored, right? Okay, it's a fact. And there could be different attitudes, universalism, we're all the same, we're all men or women religious, or it is not addressed at all. So multiculturality is there, but we don't care. Or yes, we are aware of multiculturality, and in order to solve this issue, we introduce some rare practices of interchange, multicultural days, celebration of different peoples once a year, paying perhaps lip service to diversity in a way. And then no, multiculturality is considered in a serious way. It is part of formation processes and interchange processes that translate all these, let's say, working pathways into practice in a way to have this effective interchange. So what we asked ourselves was, what of the three scenarios prevails in statistical terms? Is it scenario one, like it's being ignored or it's considered superficially, or instead this topic is considered seriously? Multiculturality is taken seriously also in view of a multicultural formation. What kind of transformation then comes from this? What kind of perceptions do the subjects who are involved have of this? Because the perception of multiculturalism is very important. And what future prospects are indicated? Both formators and formees, considering the situation, what do they suggest? What do they expect for the future? Well, what we realized, I will speak for an extra minute if I may, is the following. It is not really complex to define multiculture in the different publications, on the way in which people speak, even listening to the many people we met over these last 4 years, marked by COVID, unfortunately. Well, we realized that multicultural is cleared is the stable co-presence or concurrent presence or interactive also co-presence of people coming from different social and cultural backgrounds. Yesterday, we have seen that this definition can be elaborated further on, but I mean, multiculturalism is the stable co-presence of diversity. There can be different form of multiculturalism. There could be some kind of more multiculturalism that is more or less perceived. It can be welcoming, mutual, cordial, with a weak interchange, but without encounter implying substantial transformations. This is the key word, transformation. Yes, we're meaning, we're different, it's so nice and beautiful. It's very enriching, mutual gift, right? So there is a rhetoric, a positive rhetoric of multiculturalism, which identifies clear spaces, defined moments in time, and very limited transformation. It's more complex to define interculturalism. Everybody defines it or does not define it. Decolonialist, post-colonialist positions, interethnic, anti-ethnic stances. But at the end of the day, we have worked with a number of categories. Interculturalism is that human phenomenon that takes place through long and complex processes at different stages, which implies not only the acceptance and respect for diversity, peaceful and tolerant coexistence, but this is a key word, but also a mutual transformation and exchange. This word, right, reciprocity, this mutual aspect seem to be the most complex word. Okay, we do meet. Is there any symmetry there? Another important word. Is there any mutuality, let's say? So it is a slow change of our own supposed cultural identity through hospitality, mutual acceptance. also unprecedented syncretism. This word syncretism, that is quite uncomfortable, but which applies to us all. We do not want to accept this, but we are all syncretic subjects in a way. Unprecedented because we are transforming constantly, right? And all this in looking for dialogue in a dynamics of mutual transformation. So on this backdrop, and considering how problematic this backdrop is, we have tried to understand what intercultural competencies can be activated. The ones that are already there in our survey, we already knew that, actually. We knew that many competencies are already in place, already at work. They're not taken seriously, but they're already part of our lives. Many others instead have to be recovered. In addition to this welcoming multiculturalism, which is a good thing, we would like to think about something that instead pertains to interculture. Research, action, formation, I've already spoken about this, scientific research with a fact-finding path that's endowed with many effective tools, and this has also impacted the dynamics of the places we worked. Research, action, and formation, because focus groups and some of the activities we carried out, we have organized them as a small, let's say, formative or formation pathways. So the activity carried out in the focus group, it was not just one per each theme, but 3 meetings with 3 topics were connected like a small formation itinerary, but they were experiences that they were 3 focus groups, so they were recorded and so on. This has led to an impact on the communities where this was carried out, universities and also communities of consecrated life. There were at least 3 meetings organized on this topic. So it was quantitative and qualitative. This will be discussed at length by Professor Ottone. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pandolfi.
Passiamo la parola alla professoressa Enrica Ottone, delle Figlie Maria Ausiliatrice, professore straordinario di pedagogia sociale e interculturale presso la Pontificia Facoltà di Scienze ed Educazione Ausilium di Roma. Insegna pedagogia sociale, pedagogia interculturale, pedagogia sperimentale ed etica e deontologia professionale. Ha conseguito il dottorato di ricerca in scienze dell'educazione, in specializzazione pedagogia sociale.
Specialized at the Pontifical Salesian University with the thesis on entitled Human Rights and Educational Process in School, a process of action in a second high school. She also worked on published many articles, and her main areas of interest are teaching and learning at the university, evaluating and promoting strategic skills in learning, intercultural learning, and learning and teaching technology. So I will try to summarize. I ask to put on the same slides because we'll continue, and I thank Professor Pandolfi for involving me in this experience. So let's okay. So let's shift from our words to their words. So the words we listened to, I was pleased to hear also about the focus groups, and I look forward to reading the text and these narratives, because the greatest richness of our research was this fact of listening to people, the beauty of working together in a multicultural team, and then listening to all those participants to our research. So we introduce in a very summarized form the sample, because Professor Pandolfi already spoke about this. So what we wanted to do was involving as far as possible the academic and pontifical and ecclesiastical faculties, taking them from all over Italy, despite the more presence of the formative communities, academic and of formative life that we find in Rome. So the precious work of contact that Luca carried out let us involve 6 academic institutions and 7 formative communities of concerted life, for both for men and for women. And then in the quantitative research, much more communities were involved, and you can see that in this scheme. How many people did we involve? So it was quite complex to say exactly the number of people we involved. They started from the total population, 4,000 people they contacted, and they achieved a very good outcome in getting to 3,500 the women religious who answered to the questionnaire. But we started involving 92 teachers in institutions, so we did not involve the teachers in the quantitative phase. As far as the university students are concerned, in the quantitative students, we involved qualitative 173 students, and we involved these people with an asterisk because we involve them in several parts of the research, so it is difficult to evaluate those who participated in the first or in the second stage. Then as far as the addition to the quantitative research, we have 469 students involved. Then Professor Di Censi will explain better. About the formative community consecrated life, we got in touch and we interviewed the focus group 383 men and women religious and priests, and in the quantitative stage 400 the men and women religious who took part in the investigation. Also 5 researchers. Then about the methodology, already many things have been said. I want to introduce the tools we used as to put the basis to the following contributions. The questions were: what kind of interaction is in action in the multicultural committees of formation? What are the competences that are developed, and what are the actions that are carried out on an institutional level to promote these skills, these competences? We have a list here of the tools we used: focus group, individual interviews, a file that I will explain later on, then the structured questionnaire, and the observation of the participants. Then about the focus groups, we made 65 of them, and it was great work on an organizational level, and for the organization we moved all over Italy to go and meet the communities, and we had 3 thematic focus. The first wanted to investigate the difference between multiculturality and interculturality, and we'll talk about that later. Then I wanted to see what are the problems and the opportunities in living in a community. And you can find here a few things that you also gathered. Second, examples of interaction and exchange, and what changes in the communities of formation for the fact that several cultures are there. These 2 thematic focus were carried out with the 3 kind of groups: teachers, students, and members of concerted life. And the third one only concerned students and members of communities of concerted life. And we were focused on challenging elements. I don't, you can read out the figures, how many teachers we interviewed, how many students, how many members of concerted life, 26 groups and 13 institutions in the qualitative stage. Now the questionnaire, it was a really big enterprise. The translation of the questionnaire into 9 languages, and Professor Di Censi will talk about this very big work. Here there is a graphic that shows what is the size of the analysis and he will take it up. And while Mary Gauthier was talking, I remember the first time when we took your questionnaire in hand, we analyzed the first question starting from the results introduced, and I'm thinking of the like the pathway of migration or that could be in line with your research. Then we enlarge it on the aspects of opportunities and problems in a context of formation. In the central part, we have many questions about this. We didn't make the parallel yet between the results of the questionnaire and the analysis of the other tools that touch the same kind of analysis that will be done after the Congress. About the questionnaire, I don't add other things. This is the number of respondents and its distribution. We involved through our universities also lay students, both men and women. These will be discussed later. Now, the pathway we ran, thanks to Luca Pandolfi and Urbaniana, it started in 2017, the project, and it developed in time with the stage of a project and preparation of tools. We were at the meeting at the end of 2018, and this focus group required much time, so we got until January of 2020. Meanwhile, starting from a first analysis of the qualitative data, we began working, especially Luca Pandolfi and Luca Censi elaborated the questionnaire, and we had it ready in February 2020. Then we had the lockdown, so we suspended the work because it was not adequate to go and touch very delicate questions. So administration was moved to October. It began October 2020 and was over recently. Last few words about what we would like to continue in this pathway, especially reflection together, was the greatest gift to be able to explore some issues, especially reflect together with those who live this reality. Meeting people and communities, and that remains in our heart. Listening to colleagues when during the focus group they had a dialogue about how they live interculturality in their institute was a great richness. And last but not least, the possibility to experience tools that can be used, hopefully, for formation. I think we can close here in order to give room to them. Thank you, Professor Ottone. We didn't need to spend the other remaining minutes, so while we prepare, we have some more minutes if we want to add another commentary or
conclude. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
1 minute. Thank you.
I just wanted to explain, we did things a little differently. If I had the opportunity, your study would be the next step for us. They meld together very nicely. We in the U.S. elected not to study men religious. We know so much already about men religious, local and international. They have wonderful resources, excellent formation, tremendous support. It's the women that are out there that nobody knows about. We were shocked to find over 4,000, and we believe that that's just the tip of the iceberg. that there's really many, many more in the U.S. that are serving every day that we don't know about. So we deliberately chose to study just men. And the reason why we did quantitative first and then qualitative was, again, very practical. We didn't have any lists of these women religious. The only way to find them was to go to the orders and the dioceses and ask for those names. The best way to do that, a little tricky, is to ask them to fill out a questionnaire so that they have an idea of what we're trying to do, and then ask for the names. And again, with the women religious, we had to find them first. We found them through the survey and then asked them to participate in the focus groups. If we knew who they were, the best way to do it is to start with the focus groups so you can surface the questions that need to be asked. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that I am so impressed that you got to that stage of interculturalism. We didn't even want to go there. The U.S. doesn't understand interculturalism. What do you mean they can give to me? I can learn from them. That's an important next step that I think most people in the U.S. aren't ready to go there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much also for these last words, which are really challenging, the experience and also the research as well, and our communities as well. So thank you very much. Grazie per gli interventi.
Thank you. Now we invite the next panelist to come here to continue our reflection and especially the presentation of the results of this research on formation and action promoted by the Urban Union University, the General Union of Superior General, and the Pontifical University Auxilium, together with the Institute of Concerted Life Claretianum, the Sofia University Institute, the Pontifical Theological of Palermo, the PIME of Monza, and many other institutions and communities of concerted life of men and women. So in this panel is entitled Multiculturality and Formation in Pontifical Universities and in Formation to Consecrated Life. So I have the pleasure now to introduce Professor Fiorenza Dario, Associate Professor of General Sociology, Department of Scientific Statistics Science at La Sapienza University in Rome.
Ecco, Presidente del corso di laurea in Statistica, Economia e Società e direttrice del Master di secondo livello in Big Data.
Master of Second Level for Big Data of the Society of Knowledge, and she teaches sociology and methodology and techniques of social research in statistics, economy, and society project and leading of social investigation at the degree course in statistical studies and sociology of groups and social networks in the magisterial course on applied social science. She wrote many books and scientific articles on the topic of violence against women and work-life balance, on the topic of aging, active aging in a gender perspective, and the innovative solutions of a social house favoring a better quality of life at an old age. So you will talk about intercultural competencies in formative communities, the key concepts that came out from the lexical textual analysis of the focus groups. So we give you the floor. Thank you for this presentation. So before beginning my intervention, I want to thank Professor Pandolfi and Professor Livatone, who enabled me, and I think also I can talk on behalf of my colleagues, of this interesting adventure that was really good research experience, and I hope it can continue. We can begin with the slides of my presentation. First of all, next slide. So to give you the indications of what is the development of my paper, I will introduce the cognitive objectives concerning the focus of my intervention. I will introduce an overall framework of the corpus of the data, and then I make an insight on the second thematic focus and the third thematic focus that involved the three communities, describing the semantic clusters that I took out of the lexical textual analysis of these documents. And then I'll try to give some reading notes that can open the discussion. Then about the specific objectives, especially the questions that we wanted to answer, it took up what we asked in the formative context, how multiculturality was managed, and is it managed in an intercultural perspective, and on the basis of what principles and what are the specific skills that can favor the passage from multiculturality to interculturality, and also identify the main obstacles and problems. The data, as I said, are textual data that come from the transcription of many focus groups with the participation of students, teachers, and members of communities of consecrated life. They were analyzed, this text, with the lexical textual technique, which is semi-automatic, according to the French school of Bart and Salem, took up by Professor Bolasco and Giuliano, but also by the great Tullio De Mauro. The software we used is Iramutec, which is based on the principles of this school of lexical textual school. The phase of analysis are typical of these corpus, so pre-treatment, but I tried to identify the allegrams, n-grams, or that are integrated in the text, considering that as autonomous units in order to consider them in the specific analysis of texts. And also we calculated the lexicometrical measures to validate, to analyze the corpus and make sure that we could use this technique. We studied the vocabulary, and then we entered the three thematic focus and also the three subcorpus connected to the individual communities of participants involved in the focus group. So teachers, students, and communities of consecrated life. We use the technique of clustering and technique of Reinar, which is used on this kind of data corpus. And then in each cluster, we made further analysis of specific analysis of the repeated corpus, and every time also we made analysis on the concordance to see what text they had in common. So what is the overall picture of all these big the corpus of data, because it is more than 300,000 occurrences. All the lexicometrical measures we calculated, you see them summarized here, were in favor of the possibility of using this corpus for an automatic lexical textual analysis, so with a good lexical richness, a good extension. And this is the overall picture that I represented in a diagram. You see the two main elements of multicultural and intercultural, where multicultural is associated to this, to the element of diversity, a diversity that concerns both the descriptive dimension, the diversity of background of origin, but also linguistic diversity and internal diversity connected to how we feel different than others. And the interculture that is more addressed to the dimension of knowledge of others, the exchange and the deep sharing with others. Through what? Through a process that enables the passage from multicultural to interculture, focused on the skill for dialogue. You'll see that the size of Community of Concentrated Life favors this process in comparison to other contexts, but also commitment to listening and the flexibility, which is a very important element for the process of transformation and change, which is a mutual process, which is very tiring, very hard. An important thing that emerged is this central character of the dimension of food and also of other moments of life sharing, which is a point of encounter and sharing that can favor this process of passage from multicultural to interculture. And this also includes going beyond many stereotypes and prejudices that we often have when we meet others. So this is an image to give you the content that came out from the whole corpus. And now let's face more specifically the content of the second thematic group. First one will be dealt with by Professor Deliu. I dealt with the second and third thematic groups. This third one was about three groups of questions that were proposed to the three groups of participants, members of committees concerted life, teachers of universities and students, and we asked them to tell examples of interaction and also to the members of committee what the proposals were given them within this committee formation, to the teachers what were their proposal to students, and to the students what were the proposals they received from the teachers. Here this is to study specific the specific features that enabled us to focus on the characteristic elements of these three sub-corpus that analyzed. So what are the graphic forms specific and characteristic of this sub-corpus? About the teachers, we see general considerations such as the use of the word etc. that occurs very often as to close what they're reasoning about. The topic of interculture is very much present among teachers in all the discussions of the multicultural is present, but intercultural a bit less. Then the relation with the other teachers and with the students, with the other teachers, diversity as a fact, but they feel even more international. In the relation with the students, it is characterized by a difficulty of teachers in organizing the teaching in the way to manage and supervise the work of thesis and the selection of the sources, because there must be international sources that have a different origin, and then specific subjects. About the subcorpus of students, we see a recognition of the commitment of professors in their awareness to the multicultural dimension, with the research of adaptation to the methodology and linguistic communication. The language barrier is certainly one of the main obstacles, both for teachers and for those of students. And here we see that theology and missiology are the thematic parameters around which a discussion can take place about interculture, and also the coming up of some formal and informal spaces for interculture, where formal spaces are those of classes, but the informal spaces are those of the breaks between the lessons, where you share, you meet the other students, like you drink mate together, so this can be an element of sharing. About the members of Consecrated Life, this is the area where the topic of interculturality comes out in a more strongly. The community is an ambivalent space because it is a space of encounter, but also space of confrontation. It is a richness, as everybody agrees, but it is also a fatigue. To meet the other person is something that reaches you, but also it places you in front of hardships that you have to go beyond. Then the need for being ready, to be ready to listen and to be ready to share the choices, so more participation. And then two main points around which the whole interculturality, which are prayer and adoration and meditation, especially the festive possibility that includes food, moments of celebrating together. Let's describe the semantic clusters of this first thematic focus. We have measures we calculated. We had more than 129 occurrences and definition of almost all the segments, which were 3,600. So a partition of the subcorpus into three classes that we defined the three lexical words, and we define them in this way: interculture in university life, interculture in the experience of community of concerted life, and the initiatives proposed and implemented to favor interculture. For each of them, we saw the graphic representation of the co-occurrence, what are the words that occurred more frequently, and we have the double register here in the first cluster of multicultural and interculture. Multicultural in terms of language difference, cultural difference that can turn into language barrier, and interculture that in university life is still on the level of challenge and stimulation. So the teachers declare that interculture is not their objective, they don't see that associated to the role, and the students recognize in the formative proposal of teachers a stimulus to know the other cultures, but not to make a step further. In the second cluster, interculture is seen as not a juxtaposition of people with different origin, but implies entering in relationship to get to know the other, the experience of the encounter and living, the sharing. In a community of concerted life, interculture has three dimensions: reflexive. There are verbs such as thinking, feeling, and seeing. Then dialogical, characterized by the encounter, the exchange, getting to know, helping, and the proactive, willing, which is the one characterized by the will, what we want to learn for transformation. The third cluster concerns time, place, and initiatives. Time is the evening, the meal, the day of feast, festive days, and moments of prayers, but also greeting, meeting and greeting. The refectory, the community, the initiatives of the moment of prayer, and the festive days and the parties. Third thematic focus, we looked at the skills and problems that could arise in this context. These questions were submitted to the members of Consecrated Life and to students and not to teachers. Here you see what is specific of all these subcorpus. So as main skills, you see it on how to dialogue and to listen to, and also to know one's own culture and the different political and historical context of others, but also welcoming flexibility, very important for this need for change, and also empathy, patience, capacity to fight stereotypes and prejudices, and also decentralization, this capacity to change a perspective and welcome the point of view of others and make it our own, and suspension of judgment, and also other skills are considered secondary. Now about the specific features in the two subcorpus, we find for the students an emphasis on the problems that can come out with the teachers during the students because of the language barrier, and also difficulties of value that can emerge among students for cultural reasons. And here the aspect is the fear for opening to others in order not to lose something of oneself, of one's identity. So the encounter with others, welcoming the others, in some cases seen as a fear, and that's an element on which we should work. Then again, the word etc. is also used many times, like suspended suspension. For members of community life, they live together. There is a strong use of present in the first plural person or the gerundive, and also the conflict, the judgment of others that are the main obstacles to interculturality, and being afraid to lose something in terms of personal values. We have the 4 semantic clusters of this subgroup. One about the problems connected to cultural backgrounds, problems of daily cohabitation, then elements that pave the way to interculture, and the presupposition for the implementation of interculture. On these, about the teachers, the relationship with the teachers in the university sphere, the language barrier, low knowledge of other cultures, and the critical attitude in the capacity of teachers to see interculture a part of their mission, and the problem of relationship among students that concerns limited cooperation, prejudice, the fear to lose something of oneself in the relationship with others. In the communities of concerted life, these problems come up in a more nuanced way. What comes out is more what unites than what divides, even if being together is hard. But it's a proposal of international intercultural groups that help the communities in this process. And then the skills for the pathway of interculture, I already mentioned them before, so especially the capacity to understand the point of view of others and the capacity to be decentralized. And then the last cluster, in order to realize an intercultural horizon and become agents of our own change and mutual change, the fact of implementing these dynamics is in the capacity to open up to others without fear. And I conclude by saying that for sure it is not very clear, as we anticipated at the beginning, the difference between multicultural and interculture is not very clear. Multiculturality does not seem to be managed in an intercultural horizon, especially in the university communities, and the main obstacles certainly the language barrier, and as far as the university context, especially tolerance of diversity and favoring a peaceful cohabitation, but not the capacity we find in the communities of concentrated life to develop specific skills for interchange and mutual transformation. That confirms the importance of supporting programs of formation aimed at spreading not only a wide knowledge of the other culture, but also more clarity about how to look at multicultural in an intercultural perspective.
Grazie.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, indeed. Of course, this research will be available because the conclusions are very important indeed and very challenging for the academic world and for religious life. And the methodology and also the rigorous character of these of this research then leads to elements of knowledge that are open to both action and formation. Let us move on to Professor Nina De Leo. She's a postdoc researcher at the Department of Biostatistics at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And multi-art bandit adaptive design. She has been a visiting research scholar at the University of Toronto in Canada for multi-armed bandits, adaptive experimentation, mobile health, education experiments at the National University of Singapore, at Duke University in Singapore once again, for reinforcement learning, adaptive interventions. She is a professor at the Laboratory of Social Research Methods at the Pontifical School of Education Sciences Auxilium and the Department of Statistics of the University of Roma La Sapienza, and in intensive course, and she authored several publications in specialized and scientific journals. Thank you for your presence here, and I would like to give you the floor. Well, thank you so much for your kind words of introduction. Good morning to you all. First of all, allow me to thank people who invited me to take part in this project, namely Professor Pandolfi, Ottone, and De Rio. This project has been really inspiring and interesting, and I hope that this will lay the foundations and contribute to the knowledge of the state of the art regarding this specific topic. And as I mentioned earlier, lay the foundations in order to make education grow and so that it can favor an intercultural approach. Could you please show my slides? Thank you. Therefore, it is a great pleasure to have taken part in this project and also share with you the results related to one of the three meetings that were organized during the focus group sessions, referring to the difference between multiculturality and interculturality. More specifically, we will analyze detect and analyze the knowledge, opinion, and positions regarding the two key concepts in this research, and trying to analyze the answer to the question, what do you think is, in your opinion, the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism? A question that is included in the different research targets of the general survey that was being carried out. So the preliminary assumption is that the members of a multicultural community recognize and also give great value to multiculturalism, and that they're willing to implement those interchange processes that would bring them within an intercultural, let's say, framework. At the same time, formation institutions give value to multiculturalism, but there are different stances regarding the way in which this is managed. And this was discussed at length by Professor Luca Pandolfi. Here we will be then focusing on the first point. As I mentioned earlier, the survey that we refer to is the qualitative survey, the focus group survey, and the overall sample involved 298 participants. And here we will refer to 24 out of the 26 total groups that were interviewed. So meeting number one, focus group number one, with the theme number one. If you look at the pie graph, you see that there's a great balance between the different groups. So faculty members, students, and members of institutes of consecrated life. And this fair balancing refers also to the gender differences in the different groups. 50% were like co-ed or like mixed groups, let's say, men and women, and 25% just women, and then the remaining portion is just men. The kind of analysis that was carried out on this specific datum, the textual datum coming from this focus group survey, as a qualitative kind of analysis, which is slightly different from the analysis that was just described by Professor De Rio, since while in that case, a semi-automatic analysis was carried out using Iramutek, here we carried out analysis that includes an intensive reading of the text and also the development of the so-called code book, a set of codes that basically specify and attribute a category to relevant text segments. And unlike a semi-automatic kind of research, this is completely qualitative analysis of qualitative data, is a transparent and perhaps more the easily interpretable kind of model than what you would have in other circumstances. To make this methodology more concrete, we showed there in the lower right-hand portion, we see a text segment that refers also to what Professor Pandolfi was saying, and that is the two terms, multiculturalism and interculturalism, are used as synonyms. So this is an example of text coding, encoding, and in this case, the code that we use was when these terms are used as synonyms. The 24 documents coming from the 24 focus groups has generated about 107 encoded segments, and we use MexQDA as a software that allows us to analyze different kinds of documents, but it also allows for data analysis without any being endowed with any kind of statistical skills. So it's highly flexible. Let's move on to our results, which basically is the central point of my presentation. And let us look at level 1 codes, the macro areas that we identified within focus theme group number 1. We have interculturalism and multiculturalism that are defined based on our initial question, what is the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism? But other macro areas emerged, such as, for instance, details regarding the competencies to promote and experience interculturalism, or also problems related to intercultural contexts. And unlike what Professor De Rio has shown for theme groups 1 and 2, here the two notions of multiculturalism prevail in the discussions. However, the notion of interculturalism prevails compared to the former. Why? Well, perhaps because multiculturalism is more easy to explain. Let's say it's easier to explain it, so it's clearer. And hence, the need to work harder and to bring more examples to describe instead what interculturalism is. The prevalence of the two macro areas and their skewed prevalence, let's say, or this imbalance, can be seen from the analysis of textual documents, where we can also see that discussions on multiculturalism basically take place mostly at the beginning of the focus group meetings to lay the foundations to the intercultural phenomenon, because this requires a multicultural society just for this to happen. let's look at the codes that were generated, and let's see what codes turn out to be more frequent. First of all, we see the emergence of notion of plurality, diversity, and particularity. Then we see encounter, communion, exchange, and then entering into dialogue. But then we see a set emerging that without meeting each other, without relating to each other, or a richness of many cultures, but without the encounter. Why do you think we see this conflict here? The answer is quite trivial, actually. If we simply go and read the question, what is the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism? Well, what we can see is that if we analyze the specific codes that refer to the macro area that's related to the notion of multiculturalism, we see that there is a recognition of a diversity and plurality within a specific space, time, or context, which, however, is subject to this absence of exchange, this absence of encounter, an absence of relationship. Multiculturalism is also defined as a matter-of-fact thing, something that's defined and static, a gift from God, where, however, identity emerges. The identity of each and everyone emerges strongly. Once we look at the codes related to the notion of interculturalism, what we can see is that this encounter, communion, and exchange does take place. And usually this takes place without losing its identity and without any confusion. There is an openness in receiving and welcoming others, but also there's openness in giving to others. So we have this symmetry that was quoted earlier by Professor Pandolfi. You should also note, and this is very important, the intentional aspect, commitment, and effort in order to trigger an intercultural process, or also looking for shared projects or purposes or elements. So let's deep dive into the two concepts and see how they differ from each other. Before looking at the views of participants on the notion of multiculturalism, let's go back to the definition. The definition was already presented by Professor Pandolfi, and the key elements are staple co-presence, different social and cultural backgrounds, and mutual cultural, albeit weak, interchange. That does not imply a transformation. If we look at the codes generated by the different textual data, we can see that virtually all documents refers to the presence of different cultures and also to plurality, diversity, and particular character. And there is a recognition of the richness and the opportunities that a multicultural context might offer. But this, of course, is not devoid of conflicts or barriers. There seems to be a static and defined let's say, interpretation of the notion of multiculturalism, which is seen as a starting point. As a starting point for what? These are some examples of the textual segments that were encoded with the starting code. And you can see how this shows how each and everyone starts from their own respective cultures. We should not forget where we come from. So we all have a starting point. And at the same time, we have to recognize diversity in order to then step into a multicultural, let's say, landscape. And now, let's look at the divergencies that have emerged in the discussions that not only refer to plurality and co-presence, but also individual identity. I hope that you can see this clearly. And what we can notice is if, on the one hand, the different values are shared, co-presence, in a way, takes place in harmony. And also coexistence takes place without necessarily envisaging barriers. On the other hand, also based on the experiences that everyone had, we can notice that each one's identity has a limit, that this coexistence does take place, but not in an intercultural landscape. So there is no communication, there is no interchange, and at the same time, there's a need to standardize the different values, the values that are associated to each identity and culture. And this standardization, as Professor Gauthier was mentioning earlier, should take place also at language level, because most of the segments that were encoded refer to the need to understand the language of others. So to wrap up and to finish off this general overview and to summarize the concept of interculturalism, participants recognize the basic concepts of this, they acknowledge them. However, there are differences in relation to how communication takes place and the level of harmony that exists within multicultural societies and communities. And quite often, people do not relate to each other and do not meet each other, either because you feel complete within your own culture or because there is an absence of tools for this to happen. As a group of faculty members, they said, well, we were all different, one next to each other, without the possibility to welcome and absorb the richness of the other. We did not even know how to do that. Now let's move on to interculturalism, once again referring to the definition. Now we can see that the key elements here are multiculturalism as a foundation, basically. Then there is exchange and mutual transformation with different degrees, let's say, of intensity. These key elements have emerged in many total groups. In totally, we see mutual sharing emerges, diversity once again, so interculturalism as a foundation for the intercultural process to occur, and the key role played by openness, by the word openness. However, there is direction, plays a key role here, because opening up is a lot more evident as a way to receive the others rather than opening up to give to others. Unlike the multicultural context, an intercultural process is very dynamic. It is not static, and is based on the changes and transformation of cultural identity. But underlying all this is this intentional character that I mentioned earlier. Once again, I would like to then report to you 3 encoded segments, and you can see how interculturalism is no longer a natural phenomenon, a gift from God, a matter of fact, but requires a personal effort and has a potential of leading to richness if it is being exploited. And it's also a commitment on the part of those who live together. And here as well, we see differences emerging, but where? Regarding encounter and communion, because according to some perspectives, this encounter leads us to become one, nullifying differences. According to others, this leads to the construction of new realities or understanding something that's bigger than we are or greater than we are. And according to yet other perspectives, encounter takes place but without any commingling, any change, and without any loss of the individual identity. I already provided a summary earlier of this prior point. Now, very quickly, I would like to provide you with a list of the possible problems out there, despite the fact that the question for this focus group was not aimed at basically detecting problems, but they did emerge. What are these problems? We can define them through 3 main areas. Problems related to the individual, fears of the others feeling different or limited cooperation, problems related to culture and history, such as the presence of historical conflicts, or differences related to the institutional framework, so absence of tools, absence of adequate measures and laws. And lastly, we see competencies emerging that participants believe are necessary in order for this process to take place. These are competencies that are related to education, information, action, and at the same time, the stances of institutions and also, let's say, regulatory institutions. In conclusion, I would like to say that participants recognize and give a great value at multiculturalism, as we had assumed there are different positions and also divergences, referring to the ultimate end of multiculturalism. As we have seen, problems emerge, and at the same time, fundamental competencies emerge that should be taken into account by institutions in order to facilitate this process. Thank you so much for listening, and I would like to show you some pictures that our participants have shared with us regarding the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Professor De Leo, for this expression and specific elements about this very stimulating research. And I give the floor to Professor Luca De Censi, sociologist, scientific advisor, Human Foundation, DO and think tank for social innovation. He collaborates with the teaching and research activities of the Department of Communication Social Research of La Sapienza University of Rome. He took part in many research projects and commissions at national and European level. He collaborated with several universities in Rome, besides La Sapienza, also Tor Vergata and Foro Italico, and also third sector organizations such as Diocesan Caritas of Rome, Parsec, FIVOL, and others. Among his recent publications, Hyperconnected Adolescence, a study on domestic clocher in the metropolitan area of Rome, Poverty Syndrome of Diogen and Disposophobia, Statistics on Repression Drug Traffic in Italy to measure the ineffectiveness of prohibitionist law, Italian students of second generation Rome, relational network, expectations and aspirations. His main research interests include impact evaluation, welfare, addictions, and emerging urban poverty. Thank you, Professor De Censi, and I give you the floor. Thank you for your presentation. I also thank, like my colleagues who spoke before me, I thank Professor Pandolfi, who involved me in this adventure. And because of COVID, it then was postponed several times. I will give an outline of what came from the results of investigation of the quantitative survey in this pathway research, which is mixed methodology, used a mixed methodology between tools and qualitative approaches and quantitative approaches. We can begin with the slides. I will try to not to talk too much, but give you an outline of what we did. Of course, defining interculture, I'll take up the definition given by Professor Pandolfi of interculture, because this is one of the definitions that brought to define the research. Our survey was, or those who took part of the survey are 16 students of 16 pontifical universities and 20 communities of formation concentrated life all over Italy, involving 535 people, subjects. And as there are two sections, most of them responded to both sections, because they were both members of the communities of concentrated life and university students of the pontifical institutions involved. The questionnaire aimed at working on 4 thematic areas, multicultural cohabitation, the dynamics connected to it, opportunities and problems. Then internationalization of communities of formation. We use the word internationalization because it is different than the dimension of multiculturality in the era formation. Then multiculturality towards interculturality, because as Professor Ottone said, this is a research with mixed methods, mixed methodology, so these results will be crossed and put in comparative analysis with what came out from the focus groups and the qualitative tools. And the last part of the questionnaire concerned the intercultural competences and skills in this context. The sample is 535 people, 401 responded to the section dedicated to the houses of concerted life, and 469 in the section for the pontifical universities. Respondents were mostly women, and this is like all in the other web surveys where women tend to participate more than men, and this is also typical of the university population, which is for more than half made up of women. Then the class of age is between 31 and 40 years old. Most of some have a very high level of education. In terms of nationality, we are investigating multicultural context, so 82.2% are non-Italian. Before coming to Italy, this 82.2%, 45.4% of these non-Italians came to other countries before getting to Italy. So they already have intercultural skills, also because of this factor. Then 18.1% are lay people. 3 dimensions of analysis were identified. So we put in relation 3 contexts of analysis. That is the context of formation, so consecrated life and university. The relational dimension, the relational dimension in the different contexts, and then the individual dimension, so the professional experience. This slide includes 3 circles where we assume circularity and the mutual contamination between the dimension of the cultural dimension, in cultural differences and the problems connected to the multicultural dimension. That is, that are sources of stressing factors, language difficulties, relational malaise, cultural differences, and different ways to approach the relationships. So these elements have an impact on the acquisition of intercultural competences, and at the same time they are the fruit of a multicultural context. About the data, arriving in Italy is marked for foreigners almost half of them by several problems, 2.8 difficulties per respondent. And these difficulties concern low knowledge, bad knowledge of Italian language, which has an impact on the relationships and how they can relate to the context. Then different food habits, cultural differences, and 5.5% and 4% there were problems of ethnic prejudice or racist behavior. Even if the analysis was not reported here, these episodes have been more frequent in the group that arrived in Italy 20 years ago, because the age range is very wide of these 500 people, so it includes people who are today more than 50 years old. So this kind of racist behavior and difficulty in the last arrivals of the men, women, religious coming from other parts of the world are less. There are less difficulties in that case. Opportunities in living in a multicultural context. Among the opportunities to open up from a mental point of view to other perspectives, calling question one's own cultural identity and reflecting on the limits of one's own culture. Among the problems, the language differences, difficulty to adapt to differences, and the trend to form groups made up of people of the same nationality. And also, one of the problems is the risk to transforming one's own cultural identity. The cultural model of reference, this was asked in the academic area and also in the communities. We asked them what was the prevailing model from a cultural point of view, and they answered that it is the European model. So a monocultural approach prevailed, which could risk to trigger cultural conflicts and worsen the conflicts that were already in progress. We see the texts being adopted, half of them, or almost 75% of them, are European, of European background. And the same about living the spirituality. Also, this is mainly European. In the communities of concentrated life, we also asked them if there were differences. So this model lived in Italy in front of the one they lived in their country of origin. So partially different is the mode of response given to this question. Partially different opens to a series of reflections that concern a delicate context which is connected to the imposition of a method, of a model that still suffers of this strong cultural matrix. This is much stronger in the congregations that had their origin in Italy vis-à-vis those congregations that in time developed in countries different than Italy. the main point of the questionnaire was to understand what is the definition of interculture by the respondents that could reflect this vision. Also searching a confirmation in terms of definition of interculture. The two definitions were proposed. One is the acceptance but not a change. So no discussion about one's own identity. While the second definition refers to the one that Professor Pandolfi wrote, that I used in my research. So an exchange that can lead to a change in some aspects of the cultural identity, hence to a transformation in progress of one's own identity, one's own being in the relationship with others. And most respondents, that is 3/4 of them, have chosen this last definition. Of course, more in the university area than in the communities of concerted life. Concerning how one person lives his or her own context in front of the definition they have chosen. Among the students, the answer that gets far away from the academic way for the communities of concerted life is variably interculturally or sufficiently intercultural or not very intercultural or not at all intercultural. This should make us think how these men and women religious live their space of their community that defines their identity. Of course, in the university context, you live only one part of the day, while in consecrated life, it is a fact of life of where you live, really. So certainly there is more room for comparison, but also more room for conflict. So there are more opportunities for cohabitation is much higher. And the factors that contribute more to this vision of interculture vis-à-vis the first definition are anagraphic age, so the older you are and the more you lived in this dimension, and so you are contaminated in a way, you have a different concept of interculture in comparison to the young men and women religious. Then going back to the first datum of the second slide, the fact of having passed through other countries before getting to Italy, this favors this kind of choice towards the first definition of interculture, and also the level of education, which is connected to your age. And of course, there is a cultural enrichment in this sense. So what offers the experience of living in a multicultural context is the capacity to see the world from different points of view, also getting into the shoes of the people we have at our side, so a plural vision of the world, and being favored in the knowledge of other languages. Then to know so another point on which the questionnaire tries to investigate is how multiculturality was managed. So understanding what actions were implemented in the university area and in the communities of concentrated life. Of course, language courses, workshops to know the different cultures, study groups. That is what Professor De Rio has already spoken about. These are initiatives that do not generate a real reflection on the difficulties that can be lived in an intercultural context. So the students are required to do more workshops on the conflict management, despite adaptation to habits. So besides enlarging their food horizon, to deepen more about the difficulty they can have that can create conflicts or misunderstandings. And also reinforcing the origin from different cultures and so management of conflicts and knowledge of the language. And this is a graphic that presents the three elements: welcoming, dialogue, and listening. I leave you with this sentence from the second World Report of UNESCO. More than the knowledge we have of others, it is our capacity of listening, of cognitive flexibility, empathy, humility, and hospitality that determines the success of intercultural dialogue. These are elements that we touched in the different presentations. So the personal capability of acquisition of intercultural skills and the capacity to be to listen and to open up to others. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. I would like to thank Professor De Liu, and also Professor Di Cesi. And we are already seeing in front of us a very rich path ahead of us that not only implies the communication of concepts and the understanding that we have of these concepts of multiculturalism and interculturalism, but mostly the importance of time, space, sharing life experiences, and sharing life, actually. Another interesting element emerged, and that is, together with the difficulties and vulnerabilities that we have mentioned, respondents also suggest solutions in a way, the way of overcoming this. And this is a very important thing, I think, because sometimes research is being carried out and solutions are given. But in this case, instead, the participants themselves are trying to suggest solutions. So thank you so much. Now we will have a break. Let's be back here at 11:30 on the dot. I would like to invite those who are connected remotely, please do not turn your system off in any way, but they can have a break as well for sure. I'll see you later. Thank you.